Hello, everyone. My pleasure to welcome you to the Department of Energy's deep dive webinar on our Pathways to Commercial Liftoff report for next generation geothermal power. We're very excited about geothermal energy here at DOE and really appreciate you all making the time to join us. I'm Becca Jones-Albertus, and I'm serving as the Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Renewable Energy at DOE. And before we jump into the specifics of geothermal liftoff, I want to give a little bit more general background for those of you who aren't familiar with the Liftoff Initiative. Here at DOE, we are laser focused on enabling two of the key goals of the Biden-Harris administration: a carbon emission-free power sector by 2035 and a net zero economy by 2050. These are audacious goals, but we firmly believe they are achievable with continued focus and innovation. Hitting these targets on these timelines will require significant changes in industrial and manufacturing processes, transportation systems, and how we generate and transmit power. One key to making these changes is understanding the state of each sector right now and what we need to do differently to hit the goals on these 2035 and 2050 timelines. To set this baseline, DOE launched the Pathways to Commercial Liftoff initiative. This huge data-driven effort starts with deep engagement with the private sector and then involves all of DOE and experts from the national laboratories to determine a shared fact base. The goal is to get everyone, academia, industry, investors, entrepreneurs, government at all levels, on the same page so that we can accelerate the clean energy transition. The Liftoff reports break down the value chain of various portions of the economy and sketch a roadmap for the private sector to deploy the solutions we need. In basic terms, they set up what costs have to be hit, both the technological and market-driven barriers we need to overcome, and the amount of investment that's needed, where and by when. The term liftoff represents the point when solutions and their markets become largely self-sustaining, and they don't depend on significant levels of public capital, instead attracting private capital with a wide range of risk. Some of you may have noticed an important distinction the liftoff assessments make: private versus public investment. DOE's guiding principle is that the transition to clean energy and a net zero economy will be private sector led, but government enabled. And that's really important. There's a big role for government to play. For instance, providing top-notch market-based research like the Liftoff series, but it's definitely a supporting role. The private sector has to lead the way. So far, DOE has released 9 Liftoff reports. All of them are available at liftoff.energy.gov. Our latest report covers next-generation geothermal power, and is why we're here today. But before we get into a detailed briefing on this report's findings and recommendations, I want to welcome 3 members of the DOE team who have been quarterbacking the Liftoff effort for a virtual fireside chat. Dr. Vanessa Chan is the director of the Office of Technology Transitions and DOE's Chief Commercialization Officer. Jigar Shah is the director of DOE's Loan Programs Office, and Melissa Klambara is the director of Portfolio Strategy for the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. Welcome, and thank you all for being here. Vanessa, for those who haven't read the Next Gen Geothermal Liftoff report, can you give us the bottom line up front?
Very happy to. So first of all, just to preview for all of you guys, the report is quite extensive, so make sure you get a nice glass of wine this evening to curl up with it. But I do encourage you to read it cover to cover. But distilling it all down, I'd say the bottom line up front is this. We will get next gen geothermal liftoff when systems are producing between 2 to 5 gigawatts of power across 4 to 6 states. Reaching those markers are going to take about $20 to $25 billion investment by 2030, which echoes what you're talking about, Beck, around a private sector-led government-enabled transition. And we think this is doable for a whole host of reasons. After liftoff, the objective is to reach full-scale deployment. And to hit that level, we'll need next-gen geothermal to produce an additional 90 to 130 gigawatts across a wider geographic area. And we estimate that's going to take between $225 to $250 billion investment by 2050. Again, we think this is absolutely feasible because next-gen geothermal has some unique and really significant starting advantages.
Thanks, Vanessa. Melissa, can we step back for a minute? Can you set the stage for us on why we need next generation geothermal technology?
Sure. And I like Vanessa's suggestion that we also drink it down with a glass of wine. So getting ready for Friday reading. Yeah, as you mentioned, the administration has set a goal of transitioning to a net zero economy by 2050. So according to the latest science, that's what we need to do to slow climate change and prevent its worst potential effects. So when we were researching the geothermal liftoff reports, our modeling estimated that economy-wide decarbonization would require an extra 700 to 900 gigawatts of clean, firm capacity. So recent data show that energy demand is rising a lot faster than most people or organizations are anticipating. So even all the more reason that we need clean, firm power. And geothermal is one of those resources. We need clean energy sources that are always available, regardless of the weather, regardless of the status of global supply chains, et cetera, to complement the terawatts of variable renewables that are necessary to reach net zero. Our energy portfolio, therefore, has to be robust and diverse. That's crucial to maintaining a vibrant economy and our quality of life, including drinking wine on the weekends, reading the geothermal report. Next Gen Geothermal checks this box and has some really distinct advantages.
Thanks. And Jigger, can you give us a basic description of what we mean when we say Next Gen Geothermal?
Or, look, a lot of people are familiar with conventional geothermal, where we tap the reservoirs of steam and hot water that occur naturally beneath the Earth's surface. These energy resources are great, but geographically limited and hard to find. That's why, while we have the largest geothermal industry in the world, the US currently only gets about 4 gigawatts of energy from conventional geothermal today. Instead of hunting for naturally occurring reservoirs in just a few locations, next-gen geothermal technologies make their own reservoirs, using the hot rock that's everywhere beneath the Earth's surface. There are two types of next-gen systems. The first is called enhanced geothermal. In these systems, fluids circulate openly within a well pair that is connected by fractures made through hydraulic fracturing and/or horizontal drilling. This model scales through modular deployment of many well pairs. We estimate it's a potentially large resource, perhaps more than 5 terawatts of energy. The second type is closed loop geothermal. In these systems, fluids circulate through a long series of closed wellbore loops. This model scales through modular deployment and by increasing wellbore length. It has the same huge potential as the enhanced system, with estimates coming in at 5 terawatts or more. Combined, the liftoff analysis shows that next generation technologies could expand geothermal power by more than a factor of 20, providing 90 gigawatts or more that are clean and firm to the grid by 2050 across the United States.
Thanks, Jigger. So Vanessa, what are some of the advantages of Next Gen Geothermal?
So, Next Gen Geothermal, it has some really stunning and quite broad advantages. And I think there's a reason why geothermal is actually the Secretary's one of her favorite technologies. And the two that are top of the list for that is because, first of all, there's a secure established supply chain. So what this means is we're not impacted by geopolitics, pandemics, or other things because we actually have an existing workforce. The people now in the oil and gas sector have the right basic skill set to build and operate next-gen geothermal systems. And a lot of the proven technology used for oil and gas discovery and extraction can also be used in geothermal, which means we're pretty much ready to roll and scale as quickly as investment dollars are ready. And that is not the case for all the different clean energy technologies. And when we say next gen geothermal is clean, we mean it's really, really squeaky clean. Once the well is drilled, no additional energy is required. That means there are no fuel costs or emissions, and most next generation projects will have no secondary emissions of any kind. The geographic potential is super because we can create these resources through engineering. The liftoff analysis shows that by 2050, next-gen geothermal could be providing power in a third of the states, taking us from a potential of 40 gigawatts to as much as 5.5 terawatts. The footprint to build a next-gen system is small, so we don't need large amounts of dedicated land either. And geothermal can increase the flexibility of our energy grid. It can be stored subsurface, then dispatched when needed. So one more thing regarding workforce, next-gen geothermal will bring permanent, well-paying jobs to the areas where it's deployed. And that's a clean economic boost that could positively impact many communities that have borne the negative effects of fossil fuel-based energy. And next-gen geothermal has other advantages, but I'm not going to steal the deep dive briefing, who's going to dig into some of it. But hopefully that's a highlight as to why the secretary has been pretty not secret that this is one of her favorite technologies for these reasons.
Thanks, Vanessa. Melissa, can you give us a high-level summary of where next-gen geothermal technology stands right now and what DOE is doing to help get it ready for full-scale commercial deployment?
Yeah, happy to. And as part of the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office's portfolio, they've made great investments, $200 million specifically in the Utah Forge project, which has really enabled a lot of these improvements in technologies and cost downs that we need, specifically around drilling speeds, increasing them fivefold. These commercial demonstration projects out there now are now matching Forge's drilling speeds, which is really great news to see. These increased drilling speeds plus other improvements being made in well stimulation are the types of cost downs that we need over the next couple years to achieve the goals that Vanessa laid out as far as getting down to a cost competitive price for geothermal. I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, Melissa. So Jigar, last question here before we get more into the specifics of the report. What will it take for the next generation geothermal industry to build the trust necessary to hit liftoff by 2030? And why is it so important to get to liftoff by 2030?
As Vanessa mentioned earlier, our liftoff targets are 2 to 5 gigawatts by 2030, which will require $20 to $25 billion in investment. That's actually a very low upfront investment compared to other technologies that are trying to cross the bridge to bankability, thanks largely to the maturity of the drilling industry, which we'll talk about today. We need this amount of deployment to hit liftoff in order to demonstrate that the technology works in a wide variety of settings, to show that projects can be ordered and delivered on time and with the specifications requested, and to build up the data necessary for a bank to make that risk assessment. Once banks know what to expect from next generation geothermal projects, they can start providing financing earlier and earlier in project development, which can really change the economics and help this industry start to get real scale. We know firsthand at LPO how catalytic early financing can be in projects, and we're actively looking for next generation projects with innovative and exciting technologies to apply for LPO loans to bridge this gap.
That's an excellent primer on next-gen geothermal. Thank you, Vanessa, Melissa, and Jigar, for setting the stage for our deep dive. Before we bring on the experts behind this report, I'd like to ask for a little bit of help from all of you. Our liftoff reports are both collaborative and living documents that we intend to update regularly. So we'd like your thoughts on this current report. What did we get right and what did we miss? As well as your ideas for what we should investigate and include in the next iteration. We want to keep improving this material so that it has maximum catalytic effect. So please drop us a note at liftoff.energy.gov/input. And now I'm excited to introduce Dr. Charles Gertler from DOE's Loan Programs Office and Dr. Michael O'Connor from DOE's Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. They're the two co-lead authors of this next generation geothermal powered liftoff report. They're going to get into the details of next-gen geothermal, gathered from interviews with more than 60 industry stakeholders and dozens of DOE experts. I'm certain this presentation will spark further dialogue on how to scale and implement next-gen geothermal as part of a resilient and sustainable energy future. So Charles and Michael, take it away.
Thank you so much, Becca, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike O'Connor, and I'm a strategist in the Department of Energy's Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. I'm one of the two lead authors on this report, along with Charles, who will introduce himself in a moment. Over the past few months, we've had the privilege of working on this report with a number of colleagues from across DOE and industry. You heard over 60 interviewees. Probably many of you are on the phone right now. Thank you so much for your help. We're excited to share our findings with everyone online today, and for those of you who watch this recording later on our website. As a reminder, you can download the report at liftoff.energy.gov. You can also watch all of our webinars and also read the other reports. They're all amazing. Before we dive in, I want to reemphasize Becca's opening comments that these reports are living documents. We're anticipating your feedback. You can find a link to contact us at liftoff.energy.gov/input. With that, I'd like to pass it off to Charles to start us off with the report's top line messages.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike. And thank you, everybody on the line. It's fantastic to be here. Thanks again to our fireside chat participants. As they mentioned a couple of times, a lot of dense information to get through today. Hopefully all informative. We're going to try to keep it fun as much as we can. So my name is Charles Gertler. I'm a senior consultant with the Department of Energy's Loan Programs Office. And along with Mike, I'm one of 2 lead authors on this report. The first thing I want to do is share the report's highest level findings and takeaways. And then Mike and I are going to take you through all the detail behind each of these points, highlight where even more detail can be found in the report. So without further ado, top line messages, which you heard some of already. The main point here is that next generation geothermal power is poised to become a key contributor to a secure domestic decarbonized power sector in the United States. This is an industry that is ready to grow to large scale. There is a set of emerging technology that is just coming online that vastly expands the total resource available for geothermal power generation. The sector overall has really significant and unique starting advantages. There's transferable technology transferable technology, supply chains, and workforces from the oil and gas sector, as well as a really valuable, multifaceted value proposition. The industry is on track to achieving ambitious targets set by the Department of Energy in terms of cost. And taken together, our economic modeling suggests that deployment could reach over 90 gigawatts by 2050 and potentially as high as 300 gigawatts. To get to liftoff, or the point where the industry is self-sustaining, will require 2 to 5 gigawatts of deployment across 4 to 6 states by 2030, which will take $20 to $25 billion in investment. After achieving liftoff, achieving scale, which means building out an additional 90 to 130 gigawatts plus, will take an additional $225 to $250 billion of investment by 2050. And the report highlights or lays out 5 key challenge categories and potential solutions, which we'll get into further on in this presentation. So with that, let me hand things back to Mike, who's going to take us through chapter 1 of the report.
Thank you. Everybody got their wine ready? We got to have our glass of wine. Let's dive into the overview of chapter 1. Chapter 1 outlines the value proposition of next generation geothermal, and the bottom line up front here is that next generation geothermal basically it creates its own resource out of ubiquitous hot rock, expanding what we can pull from the earth to over 5,000 gigawatts. We see that there's a path for economically providing 90 to almost 300 gigawatts of the 700 to 900 gigawatts of clean, firm power that we know we need for a decarbonized economy. This is important because electricity demand is rapidly increasing, and clean, firm power is at a premium. PPAs today are signed at between $70 to $100 per megawatt hour, which is a fair bit larger than the average solar PPA in North America right now. Which means that developers of next generation geothermal stand to make some money. The economic deployment of next generation geothermal can double if we use its flexible generation capacity to leverage energy storage. And then finally, the starting advantages from the large and existing workforce and the supply chains that exist here to reduce key commercial and adoption barriers, allowing this scaling to occur quickly. Okay, we've highlighted a lot of the value proposition and the advantages here, but what is it? What are we talking about? What is next generation geothermal technologies? Well, it implies that it is the next generation of something that's already established. Conventional resources, which you see here on the left-hand panel, rely on naturally occurring geothermal conditions. They need minimal engineering to produce power. These resources contain both sufficiently hot rock and enough naturally occurring fractures to allow fluid to flow through the hot rock at relatively high rates. These unique conditions mean that the conventional resources are relatively rare, and absent some obvious surface expression, identifying them as a challenge. As Jigger mentioned, only 4 gigawatts of our grid currently is using this technology. Now, next generation technologies use modern engineering approaches that allow us to access this virtually inexhaustible supply of hot rock that you see represented by the red shading across the bottom of all 3 of these sort of rock cross sections. The 2 most pursued approaches today are enhanced geothermal systems, or EGS, in the middle panel, closed loop systems on the right panel, also known as AGS or advanced. EGS, enhanced geothermal, leverages no new technology. Rather, it applies core commercial oil and gas capabilities to create fractures in hot impermeable rock units. No new technology. Well depths for this are usually 5,000 to 10,000 feet deep. EGS creates many fractures so that there's a lot of surface area allowing flowing fluid to conduct enough heat from the underlying rock to produce power. It again leverages hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling from the oil and gas industry to do this. Closed loop geothermal systems, on the other hand, the right panel, circulate fluids entirely within boreholes closed to the environment. They do not require hydraulic fracturing, but they can only conduct heat through that single borehole. So to produce power, closed loop systems must develop long well loops that permeate into deeper, hotter rock. Currently planned closed loop projects today propose well depths that far exceed the depths of geothermal wells drilled today and could be hundreds of miles long. To access the point of these technologies is to access this virtually inexhaustible subsurface resource. You can see on the right-hand panel the 5,500 gigawatts that we anticipate in the US. Although a lot of it is in the Western US, there is a large stock of geothermal power, multiple hundreds of gigawatts on the Eastern US as well. Hotspots, particularly in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina. The amount of this energy that will actually be on the grid is going to be driven by the techno-economics of next generation power production. And that techno-economics can be helped by a very strong value proposition. Next generation geothermal could capture a significant share of the power market because it is clean, it is firm, it's flexible. It requires a small land footprint and no additional energy input, and it's exposed to minimal supply chain risk. Next generation geothermal can also scale quickly by the number of available workers that exist with translatable skill sets. And we'll talk about that in a bit. So we've been hammering this clean, firm point. Why? Clean, firm power is going to be required for us to develop a balanced grid that can be fully net zero. DOE-sponsored modeling states that the U.S. will need to add between 700 to 900 gigawatts of clean, firm power by 2050 to build a decarbonized, functioning grid system. For context, we have 200 gigawatts online right now, so we need to at least triple, probably more. This number may be an underestimate. The nationwide forecast for electricity demand growth by 2028 increased from a projection of 3.8% to almost 8% in 2020 in just 1 year. So this is how much growth these grids thought they needed in 2022 in the dark green bars, and then what they think they need in 2023. So this is power they need to come up with in just 1 year, basically. That's 17 additional gigawatts of capacity beyond what these grid systems were planning for. Doing this cleanly is very expensive. Buyers pay between $70 to $100 per megawatt hour for clean, firm power, and geothermal has emerged as a valuable supplier in this market. The market has 2 major buyers. It can be vertically integrated electric utilities or public and private energy purchasers driven by decarbonization goals. The starting advantage of workforce, again, is strong for this technology. Over 300,000 workers exist today that already have the skills you need to run geothermal power plants. These workers are largely in the oil and gas and electric power industries. The number of jobs needed for a mature industry, denoted in the light green bars, is less than the existing workforce in occupations with adjacent and critical skills, denoted in the gray bars. Furthermore, substantial shares of these jobs are permanent. Geothermal power creates 3 to 4 times the number of long-term jobs per megawatt as solar and wind, and these jobs are local. These factors make geothermal a key component to a just transition of the energy sector. Finally, let's talk about that economic potential that we see right now in geothermal. Next generation geothermal energy can provide 90 to 132 gigawatts of electric power to a fully decarbonized grid by mid-century, with the potential for significantly more. If we reach the energy Earthshot target we described, which is achievable, we can achieve 90 gigawatts of geothermal power. That is the light green line on the left-hand side of this screen. That's a 25-fold increase on what we have today online. If land becomes difficult to access for wind and solar, if it becomes harder to develop wind and solar, geothermal deployment increases by 25% to over 130 gigawatts. That's the dark green line. And then in scenarios where hydrogen or direct air capture become difficult to commercialize, geothermal reaches well over 300 gigawatts of power across the US, and it is across the US. The map shows where we see that power deploying economically in 2030 in the lightest green, 2040 middle green, and 2050 darkest green. And I think one of the most interesting parts of this map isn't just that there's power on the east from geothermal, but it's that it happens before 2050. It actually happens before 2040, that you have power in geothermal in New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Virginia. Finally, this flexibility component. Flexibility is a value proposition for geothermal that is hard to find for other technologies, and using it can help increase its market value. Geothermal plants can store power during low pricing events and discharge it when electricity prices rise. The impact of that type of operation is represented by the sum of the lighter green segments of this lower bar and doubles the effective deployment of geothermal. I'll hand it over to Charles to take you through chapter 2, which is about the market for geothermal and the technology improvements.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike. So in chapter 2 of this report, we cover the state of the technology and also the market for next generation geothermal. We also spend some time exploring how it changes the landscape compared to conventional geothermal. So the 5 key takeaways from chapter 2 are shown on this slide. First of all, as has been alluded to in chapter 1 and in the initial comments for this webinar, despite cost competitiveness, conventional geothermal project development is constrained by a few factors. There's a limited resource base. There's also a risk, an inherent risk of incorrect resource characterization, inconsistent repeatability, and potentially long project life cycles, as well as investment perceptions that have been shaped by some select project failures in the past. What's different about next generation technologies is they transfer some of the risk from this resource identification problem to an engineering problem. This creates the potential to sidestep some issues that have traditionally held back the geothermal industry, kept it at that lower end of full deployment. There are also iterative improvements that are enabled by modularity in drilling operations, which we'll go into a little bit later, which have cut next generation drilling costs in half over the last year. And the DOE has an ambitious energy Earthshot target for EGS of $45 per megawatt hour by 2035, which would make EGS cost competitive with other clean firm energy technologies. And we see this target as achievable, and there's a credible path towards it. Finally, all of these recent advancements taken together have really catalyzed substantial momentum in the geothermal market overall. So let's start here and dive a bit deeper into the costs of geothermal developments, and particularly start with one of the main drivers of costs, which is drilling rate, or the rate at which drills can penetrate the subsurface. And just like in life, in geothermal project development, time is money. So the faster you drill, the less something will cost. The DOE has a research site called Forge, where geothermal research is performed. Early data from this site, as well as from private sector deployment, are showing rapid decreases in drilling times and drilling costs because of operational drilling improvements. So at Forge, from the first well in 2017, drilling rates have increased by over 500%, and they've tripled in the last 2 years, which is really impressive technical progress. Private sector has also shown how these drilling rate improvements can translate to really significant cost reductions. So there are some reports from geothermal startups recently that show early deployments demonstrating a 300% increase in drilling rate, and in the process cutting costs in half from first well to subsequent wells over short periods of time. All of these advancements taken together can be seen in recent cost reductions and our projections of costs for geothermal technologies. So the DOE's 2021 enhanced geothermal shot target of $45 per megawatt hour is an aggressive but achievable path to 2035. Current cost reductions actually outpace that estimate for EGS, which is shown here on the upper left. This is driven mainly by improvements to geothermal drilling, to well field stimulation, and also to economies of scale from potential plant size that grow with improved flow rates. So with this 47% decrease in cost estimate as a starting point here in the upper left, EGS can reach an overnight capital cost OCC of about $5,000 per kilowatt by 2030 with an additional 33% reductions in cost. And again, this will be driven by exploration, well and reservoir construction, and power plant costs, and will correspond to a levelized cost of energy of roughly $70 per megawatt hour, and is an interim goal to that 2035 Earthshot target. On the bottom right here, we have a cost waterfall for closed loop geothermal systems. And there's also a credible path for closed loop geothermal systems to achieve the cost reductions that allow the technology to deliver clean, firm power at competitive prices by 2035. So taking the same input assumptions as those for the 2035 energy Earthshot target for EGS, upper left, in the bottom right, we have a hypothetical closed loop geothermal system that could see its costs fall from an overnight capital cost of roughly $33,000 per kilowatt or $300 per megawatt hour in terms of levelized cost of energy here in the 2023 base, falling by 2035 to $80 to $90 per megawatt hour in terms of LCOE, levelized cost of energy. These reductions driven mainly by drilling rate improvements, as well as by the potential to deploy new lower cost casing completion technologies. So all of these technical improvements and demonstrations are being capitalized upon in the private sector. Next generation geothermal market is showing really notable market momentum in the last 4 years, such that there's an increase in total capital raised and total deals year over year. And by 2024, we have already seen in Q1 over $250 million raised in this sector. And there is $700 million total and trending up in full non-government support. Next generation geothermal companies and startups have also achieved several really major and impressive milestones, many of which we detail in the Liftoff report. So let's move on now to chapter 3 of this report, in which we cover the pathway to liftoff for next generation geothermal industry overall. Here we show 5 key takeaways from this chapter, and just quickly zeroing in on the first bullet, the next generation geothermal industry is unusual in that the growth of the industry is characterized by a combination of unusually high upfront costs, but also a maturation timeline that includes not only reductions in key risks, but also a resource base that increases mainly as new projects are developed. This is a unique dynamic that leads to some interesting outcomes in the market, as our analysis shows. The rest of these bullets we'll cover in the subsequent slides, and this is summarized in the first chapter, in the first page of chapter 3. So let's start here with a key figure from the report, which is the pathway to liftoff and full commercial scale. Based on our interviews and based on our analysis, full-scale deployment of next-generation geothermal power can proceed in 2 phases. Phase 1, reaching liftoff, and phase 2, achieving scale, against the backdrop of continuing RD&D in pursuit of technological breakthroughs. And that's this chevron here at the bottom. So in phase 1, to reach liftoff, next-generation geothermal developers have to first prove that the market opportunity exists by demonstrating that their engineering capabilities can be deployed in greenfield conditions, that is, locations with no existing geothermal resources. Among these first deployments, successful demonstration projects in 5 to 10 different geologic settings would provide what we're calling a validation suite. And this is the group of deployments that are necessary to demonstrate reduced technological and resource risk, which would help underscore the large market potential and eventually unlock debt financing earlier in project development. This validation suite can be assembled with overall deployment of 2 to 5 gigawatts across 4 to 6 states and requiring $20 to $25 billion of investment in phase one. In phase two, achieving full commercial scale will require an additional $225 to $250 billion in investment. So with that lower risk financing that has been unlocked in phase one, the capital pool available to invest in phase two should be expanded and should continue to expand and snowball. As in the extraction of other subsurface resources, development of new geothermal resources should have a knock-on effect towards proving the viability of further geothermal resources. And this is how we see a potential unfurling of geothermal development from across the country over this time period. To reach its full potential for scale in a decarbonized grid by 2050, next generation geothermal really has to stay on track to hit liftoff by 2030 in order to continue this trajectory at pace. And there are 4 key enablers that we've identified that can help the industry stay on this path. So on the bottom panel here, we see number 1, cost reductions that hit the targets we've set out. This can be realized through continual iterative improvements as well as RD&D. And importantly, next-gen geothermal doesn't need to reach full national average cost parity with other technologies to reach liftoff because it will have early advantages in competitive geographies. The second key enabler is multiple large-scale, that's 30 megawatt plus, demonstrations for emerging and promising technical approaches. The third key enabler is well-designed power purchase agreements that reflect the value proposition of clean, firm power that next-generation geothermal provides. So competitive prices, preemptive agreements, strict timelines with real penalties, these can all create an increasing confidence in development timelines and incentivize the technical progress, as can a growing track record of delivery. And finally, the fourth key enabler is early and continued community engagement in the project development and technological development process. So the current low maturity of next-gen geothermal industry gives it an opportunity, in a sense, to collaboratively develop processes and methods with very early, very frequent, and two-way dialogue with communities, and assessing environmental considerations, whether it's water quality or the potential for induced felt seismicity, through this process and this lens can inform a more just, a more equitable deployment. It can reduce burdens to underserved communities, and ultimately it can lead to not only greater project success, but also greater community benefits. The final section of Chapter 3 explores the emerging development models available to next generation geothermal as the industry matures. So from first of a kind on the left to nth of a kind projects on the right, next gen geothermal can expect the entry of new developer classes, new sources of investment, new development models that will drive deployment. And ultimately, a fully mature and de-risked geothermal industry could develop projects using a traditional project finance model in which combinations of debt and equity are available early on during a project's life cycle. In the report, we go deeply into each of these columns and each of the potential developer classes and investment sources. So I'll refer folks there if interested. But in short, leverage projects, free up capital for other developments, as is the practice for current traditional renewables developers. This is further right on this slide. But on the path to that model, there's also higher risk financing strategies that may be in use at the time the industry reaches liftoff. So with that, let me pass it back to Mike to take us through Chapter 4, where we discuss challenges and potential solutions.
Thank you, Dr. Gertler. Chapter 4, as he says, as Charles said, is how we framed the challenges that we heard from industry in our interviews and from our analysis, and the opportunities that were brought to us through those engagements. There are 5 categories of barriers and then solutions that we saw that could unlock those barriers. I'm just going to highlight the categories now, and then we'll go into each one with the remaining time we have in this webinar. These challenges we saw include the high upfront costs, risks to perceived and actual operation, and long development timelines, existing business models that undervalue clean, firm power, and community opposition that can be quite significant in some instances. Our interview and analyses identified these sets of potential solutions, and I'll go into detail on each one of these in these subsequent slides. So the primary barrier here is high cost and high risk at the start of new projects to limit available capital. This slows the pipeline of new demonstrations and reduces the opportunities that you have to demonstrate cost reductions. Each time you drill a well, you can reduce your cost, but you only can do that if you drill the well. 25 geothermal wells were drilled in the United States in 2022 compared to 24,000 wells drilled per year in the oil and gas industry. This is a 3 order of magnitude gap that won't necessarily ever be rectified, but it does need to be closed to some degree. These few new wells occur also mostly in these environments that are already de-risked. Geothermal power already exists in these environments. However, the validation of next generation geothermal technologies requires de-risking in mostly new environments. So the fastest path to enable this generation of geothermal development to scale up is through early capital to finance new demonstration projects, specifically in new regions. A 10 demonstration portfolio would cost about $4.5 billion, and it's commensurate with other nascent technologies with similar opportunity spaces funded through recent clean energy legislation, as you see in the bottom half of this slide. The capital required to fund these requisite demonstration projects can come from a variety of sources, each with different motivations. Governments can provide that capital. Equity investors can and have already provided that capital. Strategic investors or investor off-takers, such as a data center operator or a manufacturer, can provide that capital. Oil and gas majors and service providers with the necessary and requisite skill set can also provide that capital. Demand side signals also have a major impact on geothermal project development in the pipeline. There are 2 primary pathways through which demand side mechanisms have already moved the market. First being these procurement mandates from public utility commissions. This is particularly evident in states with clean energy standards already on the books. Best example of this, unsurprisingly, might be California, where a ruling by the Public Utilities Commission mandated the procurement of 1 gigawatt of clean firm power by 2026. This ruling went on the books in 22. This drove the signing of 400 megawatts-ish of new conventional and next generation geothermal power purchase agreements at or exceeding $70 a megawatt hour. This is more than the entirety of geothermal PPA signed over the decade prior to that. High value power purchase agreements for large, well-capitalized private providers, such as data centers and manufacturers, can also provide a market. Last month, Google and Amazon partnered with the steel company Nucor to issue a request for proposals for new clean firm power, building off of an already successful partnership that exists between Google and Fervo to provide clean power that started in 2021. Targeted financial instruments, new financial instruments targeted for geothermal, could also help fund project early development. These could include things like cost share drilling, where some entity provides lower risk capital for the earliest stages of these projects. Continual R&D also can reduce the number of wells required, improve the precision of measurements collected during drilling, and decrease the amount of time and materials that each well requires to be drilled. Those can also reduce cost in a serious way, and that's been our path for the last 10 or so years. The next key barrier to overcome is on the perceived and actual operability risk for these deployments. The elevated site-specific resource characterization risk that's typically associated with geothermal has chilled investment interest. It's something we heard over and over again in our interviews. Investors want to see evidence that these next-generation geothermal technologies have truly eliminated the resource risk that conventional geothermal is associated with through projects in a variety of environments, operating successfully over long timescales, and overcoming development failures that might have come across the way. Developers want to know that their capital won't be completely stranded. Developers must demonstrate that next-generation geothermal projects can be developed in truly new environments without any prior geothermal activities. The path to doing this is doing this. Strategic demonstration siting and data dissemination from 10 plus early deployments to show sustained power production can assuage these large institutional investors and begin to bring those capital online that hasn't been online yet, marching us to a higher level of maturity if you think about Charles's slide on markets. The third key barrier to overcome is on long and unpredictable historical geothermal project timelines. These can make projects less appealing and ultimately harder to fund. Development uncertainty stems from a complex and interconnected permitting regime for projects that are on federally managed lands, and that's where most geothermal projects today are occurring. Changes driven by technology and policy can increase the certainty and cut the project timelines by 3 or more years. Policy changes could allow the combination of certain categorical exclusion steps and centralize key subject matter expertise. Technology changes include the ability for us to tell a regulator where we know the power plant is going to be before we start developing, because the technology allows flexible siting of that power plant. Both the current steps in our process, which you can see as the top row of this figure, and the justifications and pathways for potential amendments to the process, which is the bottom row of this figure, with Charles's email right there in the middle of it. This can be described in detail and is summarized in chapter 4 of the report. The fourth key barrier we saw is on the business model for geothermal. What's the business case for this technology? Utilities currently consider clean electricity sources and firm electricity sources as separate products with separate markets. However, to decarbonize the grid, firm power must also be clean, and the cost of that joint value proposition is higher. Although these clean firm sources are in high demand by mid-century, they have high costs today that prevent them from being deployed, even though we need them. And few markets are looking for this joint value proposition. The public utility commissions can reproduce the successful model that California demonstrated to mandate the procurement of these clean firm resources. This might be a premature solution in the eastern US, where some of these resources still need to be viably proven out, but could spur substantial quick development in the West. Project design can also drive more revenue, increasing the value proposition of the technology. It can do so through flexible operations, as discussed in chapter 1, or through targeted strategic off-takers pairing geothermal with other key electricity users, such as or heat users, such as zero carbon industrial processes, direct air capture, or hydrogen production. The world's first direct air capture facility up in Iceland is powered by geothermal energy, and studies are investigating expanded feasibility of these opportunities in the US and abroad. Finally, community opposition, as I said, in some instances can be very, very strong. Technical similarities between EGS and oil and gas hydraulic fracturing could prompt environmental health concerns like those pertaining to hydraulic fracturing. While there are key differences in the environments and the designs of unconventional oil and gas wells and next generation geothermal wells that reduce and sometimes eliminate the risks associated with oil and gas hydraulic fracturing, lack of public awareness of these differences and lack of public awareness of the technology in general could create substantial public opposition that could derail projects. Next generation geothermal developers can benefit from transparent, robust environmental monitoring to help ensure environmental impacts are minimized, and the technology develops a strong social license to operate. The department has a decade-plus history of successfully managing seismic activity at its EGS sites through the protocol for addressing induced seismicity associated with EGS, which other projects that are doing EGS should adopt. Similarly, transparent monitoring and disclosure of any chemicals leveraged in the next generation geothermal process can improve operator license to operate, as well as the opportunity to substitute toxic chemicals from non-toxic alternatives, which we're seeing developers do today. Geothermal operators can proactively mitigate these concerns through local trust building and engagement, including community-informed siting and strategic two-way dialogue. Operators can take advantage of these additional steps to ensure that local communities understand and accept the project and their impacts. For example, at the DOE-run Utah Forge site, seismicity monitors are actually on display at the public library, so community members can transparently see the impact of drilling and drilling activities on their community in real time. This is the bottom line up front of the hour-long report, of the 57-page report, excuse me. And I'll pass it off to Charles for any next steps that we have.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. O'Connor. And thank you everybody on the line for joining us this Friday afternoon. I've been tracking the number of folks in the participant window, and it has stayed consistently high, which is, we're very touched that you chose to spend your Friday afternoon with us. And we hope, as Vanessa suggested earlier, everybody can have a nice weekend and maybe tuck in with a glass of wine or any beverage of choice.
That is not a government endorsement.
Right. But thank you very much for your time. We want to hear from you. As has been mentioned a few times, please log into liftoff.energy.gov/input. These are living documents. We are already updating the one that we published just a month ago. Hard to believe, but it's true. So please reach out there. Please follow all the social channels that brought you here in the first place, and have a fantastic weekend. Thank you very much.